How about if we start with the MPEG units?
The first one is an Ampeg 1. It was first Ampeg 1 digital video recorder, and that was built in '91 for the CIA to bring video from Bosnia back to the Pentagon. And then after we sold a bunch to the CIA and FBI and a whole bunch of other places, we then started selling it to TV stations, and then they were using it for electronic news gathering to get video back to the station. And then it won the top 10 of NAB in '94, and then I designed the first MPEG 2 digital video recorder, which won the top 10 of NAB in '96. And then later I started building smaller versions of video through the cell system boxes. And these little boxes, some of them were put in your pocket. And those were used for, still are used for electronic news gathering.
What was the impetus behind developing the MPEG-2 recorder? Was there a specific project, or was it just the next logical step?
That was just the next logical step. Once you've got the MPEG-1, then the next one was MPEG-2, and then we didn't have any financing from CIA or anybody to do that. We just did that ourselves. But it did win the top 10 of NAB in '96.
And how many units roughly do you think you sold?
That wasn't a big seller because all of a sudden there was major competition from 5 or 6 companies and had big advertising budgets and so forth. And so we really kind of just dropped out of that whole thing because of the competition.
Mm-hmm. I did notice that you had a field unit that was a field recorder. And
that's right. The one that is a picture on the website under MPEG-2 recorder was a rack-mounted one that was built to replace directly a tape recorder that had the same knobs and controls and so forth. And then we built a portable version in a portable case with a handle on it that did the same thing, but it didn't have as much hard drive and storage space, but it was easy to carry around.
And I noticed that it was a 422 recorder, not a 420 recorder. And right. Even today, most MPEG-2 recorders are 420. Why 422?
I just wanted to have the best quality that was available, and we could do that. We were using an MPEG encoder board that used CQ chips, and the board was made by a company called Optivision, and that was our one of our main connections to the CIA, because the president of Optivision was an ex-CIA guy, so he knew how to manipulate and get contracts from the CIA.
Mm-hmm. And did it sell just to television folks, or did it sell to other folks in government or industry or anything like that?
The MPEG-1 one sold across a lot of military, a lot of other customers. The market for that was growing, and then by the fourth year of selling the MPEG-1 unit, we then started having, once again, competition from major brands and so forth. So we had a really good run of 3 or 4 years before we got overtaken by the big guys.
Mm-hmm. And the field recorder, did that catch on at all, or was that also did it have competition?
That one never got going, because by the time we got to the MPEG-2 one, the people that were coming up with competitive units had smaller units than our rack mount, and similar size to the portable one, so that one never did catch on.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the cellular units. What was the impetus behind that? Was that another one of those, I'd like to have this, or did somebody ask?
Well, that one was using the MPEG-1 recorder. Then we did some software updates to be able to connect it to 8 modems to be able to send video live through cell systems. And our first customer was Channel 9 in Oklahoma City, that is the premier station for hurricane watches, and they needed the live coverage because they had so many hurricanes, and they would just go on the air and say, well, there's a hurricane in this area, why don't you hide it under your house? Well, people got so used to that until they could show a video of that hurricane, and people would then realize that they really should do something.
So they were. It was to combat their desensitization to the alert.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is tornadoes, right?
Tornadoes. I'm
Yeah.
not hurricanes. Tornadoes. Right.
I
Tornadoes.
was gonna say
Yeah.
not too many hurricanes in Oklahoma.
No. Tornadoes. Right.
And is that still a shipping product today?
No. That only was from 92 to 96 or
Okay.
7. And then that was replaced by the little smaller versions, and there's still a pocket-sized version of the Ampeg through Cellular video unit on the ColbySystems.com website.
Mm-hmm. So it's still a shipping product?
Right.
Okay. And does that use MPEG 1 or MPEG 2 now?
It uses MPEG 1 still.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your telephone-related stuff.
Well, I built the first telephone answering machine, and it was built in 1960, I think, and it used 2 tape recorders that I got for $10 a piece in Times Square in New York City, and hooked those up with some electronics interfaces, and that was, back then you couldn't hook anything to the telephone line. The telephone company made you not, had a rule you couldn't hook anything. So it had a little bar that when the phone rang, it picked the bar and that answered the phone, and then we had mics and speakers, and that recorded the stuff on the tape recorder. And then I built a second version of it that had one tape recorder with multiple tracks that was in a more fancy box with walnut end pieces and so forth. But that was the first telephone answering machine, which ended up being a big business. Although I was in college at the time, and I had two other projects that were more easily sold. One of them was the first low-cost TV camera, which I designed to be used in closed circuit applications, and that one sold for $300 at a time when RCA and another company were selling the same thing for $2,000. So I put myself through college building and selling and installing those cameras. So that was something that was done because I was able to. I found a source of lenses in Japan, a 25 millimeter lens for $5. I built a machine that wound the focus and deflection coils that I could make that whole assembly for $10 versus the other way of getting it was to buy it from Cleatron for $400, which puts the price way up just for that one item. And so anyway, I sold these to a lot of companies to watch their gate, sold for restaurants to put outside for promotional things. I sold them to TV producers that would be able to then have what they do, they put the people doing the commercial in one room and they watch it on television in the other room using my camera. So that was a fun product. And then when I went to work for Ampex in '65, by 1971-2 area, Ampex decided to go in the color camera, broadcast camera business, and I was on the team that built that. And in fact, I was the guy that was the operator on the brochure for the camera because we were really short time to get it to NAB, and we were working at 3 o'clock in the morning the day before it had to ship to NAB, and I was the only one that had the right kind of clothes on to play the camera operator, so I ended up being on the cover of the brochure. And then I later built more cameras. There's the world's smallest camera that is a picture on the website that was a 1" by 1" camera that was I designed in 1997, I think, and sold those for about 2-3 years. And that was really fun because 1" by 1" camera, and of course now with cell phones, the cameras are 1/4" by 1/4". But back then, this was the world's smallest TV camera.
Revolutionary.
Yeah.
So let's step back for a second and talk a little bit about why you went to Ampex. What got you to Ampex?
When I was in college, I worked in a radio station as the engineer, and we had 4 different kinds of tape recorders. And the Ampex 350 was the only one that always worked. All the other brands always had some problem, always quit, usually quit on the air. It was just down to the Ampex one was the best, never quit, no problems. It was just the best one. So that's where I first learned about Ampex. And that was at the time when Ampex had just invented videotape recording, and we built the first one in '55. And in fact, the last guy that worked on that first machine, Ray Dolby, just died last week. And there was the 5 people, they're all gone. But that was the start of video recording. And I started at Ampex in '65, so they had gone through 2 other iterations of recorders by the time I got there. But then I worked on many projects at Ampex that were great. We built TV stations, we built mobile television production vans. On my website, there's a picture of a whole bunch of pictures of a van we built for a company called Transmedia that I ended up giving the presentation to the SMPTE show. And that was the biggest, best, most expensive video production van in the world. And it was the first one that had 4 channels of audio and patchable power system and a whole bunch of other really unique things. And then later on, I worked on several projects for NASA, for the Navy. We built the system that they use to de-arm mines and bombs. There's a place the Navy has that is only about 20 miles from Washington, D.C. that when they find a explosive anywhere in the world, they bring it there and they figure out how to disarm it. And they have these robots in these buildings that have walls that can fold down in case it blows up. We built the TV system for them. We built the system for NASA to monitor the astronauts when they're training on the ground right after that terrible situation where White and I think Grissom got killed on the ground and they had no idea why it happened. So
the Apollo 1 fire.
Yeah, Apollo 1 fire, yeah. So we built the TV monitoring system that was on 24 hours, depending on how long they were in there. And then I worked on the world's first broadcast portable battery-powered recorder, the VR3000. And I designed the upgrade of the servo system, the 2-channel audio add-on, and a whole bunch of other additions to that machine. And that was the machine that started a company called Compact Video. They bought a couple and put them in the back of a Jeep, and they were off and running. They could go out anywhere and do live video recording. I mean, not live, but tape video recording in high quality enough for broadcast. And that company went on to do really big things.
How long did you stay at Ampex?
I was at Ampex from '65 to '77.
Okay.
And then after that, then I started my own company. I built a thing called Colby Communication Center, which was actually the first hostage phone for police departments. And the way that came about was a guy walks into a bank in Santa Clara and goes into the president's office and holds a gun to his head and says, "Call Channel 4 and tell him I'm going to shoot you if you don't put me on the air." So he did, and they put him on the air. And the police are sitting there saying, this guy shouldn't be allowed to do this. How come he can get away with calling somebody on the phone? Well, there was a law in California that said you cannot interrupt a phone call no matter what. So the next day after this went down, the state legislature passed a law that says if somebody's doing something illegal, law enforcement can interrupt the phone line. So I built this box in a suitcase that had all the things that were needed to make the capability of cutting the phone line, hooking it up to this, being able to monitor, control what's happening on the phones, and let the person be recorded or let them dial out or not. And I showed this to the FBI office in San Francisco, and they said, wow, this is something the FBI really needs. So they set up a demo with me at the Quantico FBI office, and I went back there, and they loved it, and they bought a bunch of them. And then they wanted me to get AT&T approval, so they sent me to Bell Labs. I gave a demo of my unit, and the next day I found out that the team of 15 Bell Lab people that had been working on this thing for 2 years were dismissed.
So you had done what the Bell guys hadn't done.
In 2 months what they were working on for 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
And we sold those all around the world. Every country that had a prime minister or president or whatever had one of our units in their security division. So that was a real fun project, and that lasted for many years.
So tell us about the cantaloupe inspector.
Well, when I was 14, this friend of mine had a lot of contacts in the cantaloupe business in Fresno, and the cantaloupe business was being hurt by the fact that the union, the Cantaloupe Pickers and Packers Union, was able to get the prices that they were charging so high that it was putting these cantaloupe growers and packers out of business. So they said, we need a way of automating this packing shed. So I designed this machine, and there's a picture on the website you can cut in, and it looked at each cantaloupe with what essentially was a color camera and decided what one of 5 grades it was, and it had little doors that opened and put the cantaloupe out in one of the 5 different chutes. Well, we put it in as a test in this cantaloupe packing shed, and the union, which was one of the roughest unions in the world, more so than the stagehands union in New York City that has a real bad reputation, they actually blew up the cantaloupe shed and my machine with dynamite. And they said, if you ever try that again, we're going to continue to blow it up. So that was the end of that.
What a shame. Tell us a little bit about how it worked, though. You spoke a little bit earlier about how it sensed.
Yeah, it used 3 different solar cells with filters over them to be able to determine the color of the cantaloupe that was green, partially green, whatever. So it was essentially a 3-chip color camera that was built in what year was that? I was 14 or 15. That was the 50s. Yeah. So that was
pretty impressive.
Pretty neat for somebody 14.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. There are some standard questions that I usually start off with, but I didn't this time. And I'd like to get those out of the way if we could.
Okay.
So first, what's your full name?
Charles Edward Colby Jr. And I go by Chuck Colby.
And where were you born?
I was born in Denver in 1942.
And what date were you born?
February 6th. And we lived in Denver till I was about 11. And then my dad had been working in the construction of home construction business, and then he was trained as an engineer, so he got a job in, I think it was Douglas Aircraft in LA, so we moved to LA. We lived in Torrance for a while, and then we moved to Lancaster, which was next to Edwards Air Force Base, where he was working on projects, and so he worked there, and then he worked in Sacramento. He had a really interesting career. He worked on the Goodyear blimp. He worked on the Snark guided missile. He worked on the B-52. We worked on the what was that? The first the first commercial plane that was I don't know. Anyway, and then the last thing he worked on before he retired was the rocket ship that went to the moon, or the booster that went to the moon.
Saturn V?
Yeah, and so he worked from lighter and air through all of the high-tech things, and then the Saturn V, which was
So it sounds like
really
invention is a family tradition.
It was really neat for me as a kid, though, because he would take me to the surplus place of the aircraft company. They had all these really neat things that you could buy for $10 or $2, and so I ended up getting a little aluminum parabolic dish that was out of the radar of a jet fighter. And when Sputnik was launched in 1967, I built the first home Earth station that received Sputnik.
Oh, wow.
And I had a science fair project at the high school science fair that I won top place in that showed this. And then fast forward 20, 30, 40 years later, a friend of mine worked at Sony, and he called me up one day and said, Sony just got a contract for the largest satellite Earth station in the world. It's going to be built for Rupert Murdoch. It's going to be called A-Sky B. And so he said, and since you built the first satellite Earth station, and you built the first video Earth station with my Microwave General company, he said, it'd be great if you could come and work on this. That would really be great. So I did, and I went there, and I was assistant in charge of 120 engineers, software, hardware engineers that worked and designed this A-Sky B satellite Earth station system that was like a $200 million project. And then right at the last minute before they were going to go on the air, he sold it to DirecTV. So it's now DirecTV's Castle Rock facility, the main DirecTV system.
Oh, interesting.
And so I not only supervised the construction, but I also designed a whole bunch of sections of it. The video switcher, the RF distribution system, I designed myself.
Sure. I was lucky enough to see that facility a number of years ago. I used to work for Intelsat, and I got to go out there and work on their uplink because they were using some of the Intelsat birds.
Oh, great, yeah.
So just to finish off a couple of questions, where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Lancaster, which was a really interesting school, and they had the largest bus system in the world. They had like 60 or 70 buses because they picked up people all through the whole central California, from Antelope Valley all the way over to the Grapevine up to almost to Bakersfield, and brought them. Some of these kids actually were on the bus 2 hours to get to school and 2 hours after.
Oh my goodness!
So I went there for a year, and then we moved to Fresno, or Sanger, near Fresno, and I went to San Joaquin Memorial, and then I got a commission to go into Annapolis, which had to be done by a senator, a state senator. And then I got to looking, and I found out that when you go to Annapolis, you go to school 4 years, you get out, you're an ensign, you're stuck in the Navy for 4 years at $300 a month. But there was another choice called Merchant Marine Academy. That it was one of the 5 academies. When you go there, you go to school for 3 years, then you go on a square rig ship around the world on school. You get out of there and you go to work as a third mate on a commercial ship at $3,000 a month. So I had them changed. Now I got a commission to that. So I went there. I was there for about 6 months. And then this Hurricane Donna in 1960 hit New York. And all of the boats from the yacht harbor in New York were drifting across in the wind, and they were smashing against the seawall. So a bunch of us went out with grappling hooks and ropes, and we were pulling these boats around the corner out of the harm's way. And this big wave came in and smashed everybody. And luckily, I mean, everybody was spared except me. I hit my knee and was in the hospital for 3 or 4 months. And then I couldn't go back to school that year because I missed so much school. So I went to Hawaii and started a tropical fish exporting business. And that was really profitable. And at that time, you didn't have to have a license, and The reason that it was a big deal was somebody had just invented how to make artificial salt water that fish could live in. And that meant that now you could live anywhere and have fish. Before you had to live near the ocean and get the water. So we had three guys, we used to go diving almost every day, and we would catch the fish in both nets and with these slurp guns that you suck in the fish. And then we had a TWA pilot who was part of the company, and he was able to put the fish, we put them in a box about that big with a plastic bag and about that much water. That would support about 5 fish for 2 days with the oxygen above it. We filled pure oxygen. And he would be able to put them on the plane behind his seat in his private little area, because these fish are so sensitive that if they go plus or minus more than 5 degrees in temperature, they die. So you couldn't put them in a cargo hold. So this guy was able to get off the plane in San Francisco, get up to the Steinhardt Aquarium, and that was our big customer. So that lasted for about almost a year, and then he got transferred to a different route, and so we had no way of getting the fish back. And then I decided to go back to school. I couldn't go back to the Merchant Marine Academy because my knee was too bad shape, and so I went to Fresno State and got a Bachelor of Science degree in electronics, and at the same time I was going there, I was teaching night school in electronics at a trade school for most of 3 or 4 years. And then I got a job on the Santa Fe Railroad, which was really a hard thing. It was the most dangerous job in the world at that time.
Why?
As a brakeman, because you were required to jump on and off moving trains going 30 or 40 miles an hour, and you were required to do things that were just unbelievable. I mean, the Central Valley in the winter is full of fog, and sometimes you can't see 10 feet ahead, and that was before they used two-way radios. They were using lanterns that you swung to give signals to the engineer of what the train should do. And the fog I remember being a place where I was trying to stop the train, and the train was pushing these boxcars full of washing machines off the edge of a cliff. And it was like 10 or 12 boxcars full of stuff that just went down the drain into the river. And so that was really good, though, because, I mean, as far as pay, they had this deal where they hired 10 college kids in the summer, and they paid the same as somebody who had worked there for 20 years. And so I remember walking into the place where they were doing the hiring, and the guy said, there was 5 people ahead of me, and the guy said, "I need your social security number." So everybody's getting their wallet out, trying to find their card, and I said, 554, and he wrote that down and says, "You're hired," and that was the last job. So that was great, because I made more money than any other college kid could even hope to make. And in the meantime, I was building my low-cost TV camera. So between those two things, I was really doing big deal, and ended up I was able to buy a new Corvette, and all kinds of stuff that other kids couldn't do.
So what took you to Ampex? Why Ampex?
Well, I worked at a radio station, and the only the 5 or 6 recorders we had, the only one that always worked, never quit, was an Ampex 350. And so that was, I knew that name from building good stuff.
And you sought them out?
Yeah, so I sent my resume to Ampex. I sent it to GE Nuclear Division, and at that point the nuclear business was starting to taper off, so I was lucky I didn't go there. And I sent it to a company called Cutler Hammer in Milwaukee, and they had a policy of all new hires were interviewed by the president of the company. This is a big company. I mean, they got tens of thousands of products. In fact, that was the first question. This guy said, "You know how many products Cutler Hammer makes?" And I said, 1,000. He said, "Wrong. It's like 25,000 products." I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so that was impressive. But what wasn't impressive is all the buildings were connected by underground tunnels, because in the winter the snow is so high around there that you can't walk between buildings. I figured, I don't think I want to live in a city that has snow that deep. I lived in
Yeah.
Denver, and it was fun when I was a kid, but I'm tired of that. So I ended up at Ampex in Redwood City.
And what was Ampex like at that point? What kind of a company was it like to work for?
Well, it was growing and it was fun. We had great projects. Every one of them was just super interesting. And I got in to third or fourth engineer in the special products division, which was a brand new division. And we got all the special products. I mean, we designed TV stations and mobile vans and stuff for NASA. And then in fact, I worked on the first multi-channel audio recorder called the MM1000. And we built that whole machine in 3 weeks because it was built from AG440 electronics. It was built from a video deck with the video deck motors and controllers. And the only thing that was special was the 8-channel head, which we had built in the Ampex Head Lab. And we took it to AES in New York, and that was the first multi-channel audio recorder, and it took the recording industry by storm. And then we built a 16-channel version, and I think eventually a 24-channel version. So that was really fun. And then all of the mobile vans, I probably designed more television mobile vans at that time than anybody in the world, because we were turning those things out every 3-4 months, and that lasted for 4 or 5 years. And then they ended up moving all the things that Special Products was working on to an equivalent thing in London. Ampex decided to move it to London, just like Ampex decided to move all the manufacturing from Redwood City to Colorado Springs. So that was really funny, because at that time they had about 10,000 employees, and the parking lot in Redwood City was like 2 or 3 square blocks until they moved manufacturing to Colorado Springs, and there was, instead of 2 or 3 square blocks, it was like 2 or 3 rows of cars.
Wow.
So
big difference.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
And then in 1972, Ampex had an event that caused the end of Ampex to start, and that was the SEC passed a law that said that insider trading of stock was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this guy Roberts sold all of his Ampex stock the day before he announced a $90 million loss. And he was the first U.S. company president to go to prison because he violated that rule. And that was the start of the downfall of Ampex. So Ampex went from 15,000 people. They started selling off all the other divisions, and the only one that was left was the AVSD, Audio Video Systems division, and the digital instrumentation division. And today, in 2013, that's the only division that's still in business in Ampex, is the instrumentation division that makes digital, not video, well, digital recording devices.
For like telemetry and aircraft.
Yeah.
Stuff like
So,
so why do you say that was the beginning of the end of Ampex? Was that event with was he the president?
That triggered the start of the downfall. All of a sudden, the stock went down. They started having to sell off divisions, and it just went downhill from there. Mm-hmm. And I stuck around from 72 to 77, and they took away all this profit sharing. They took away the increase every year that used to be 5 to 10%. They stopped that. It was just going downhill. People were leaving like crazy, and they were selling all these divisions off. And so it was really the end of the whole thing. Wow. So they were down to, by 77, they were down from 15,000 employees to maybe 6,000 or something.
Wow. So what was the $90 million loss? What was behind that?
Well, part of it was this product called InstaVideo, mm-hmm. which I show the camera we had earlier.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be a consumer version of a camcorder. It was a camera that had a handle, and you looked in, and you could then walk around, and had a little recorder that was about this big that you carried on a shoulder strap. And it was the start of the camcorder, but somehow with the loss from all of the other places they were losing money, they decided to cancel that project. And so I was working on that camera to be able to sync it with a sync generator to externally drive it and increase the gain of the preamp and the thing and so forth. And so when they decided to get out of that business, they only had 7 or 8 prototypes of that built. And so they recalled them all and crushed them because they didn't want Sony to get their hands on, because there's a lot of really high-tech stuff in there that they didn't want lost. So I just happened to have one stuck in the cabinet in the back room that they never found. So I got the only one left in the world of a $30 million project.
And was there any particular impetus for you leaving, or what got you to that moment that said, yes, it's time to go out on my own?
Well, I told you they cut off profit sharing. They stopped giving raises. They moved people around, and it was just getting to be not a fun place anymore. And then I had the chance to design this Colby Communication Center for the FBI. And so I ended up building these units here in this house in my basement. I had 4 or 5 workbenches and 4 or 5 people that were either ex-Ampex or still working at Ampex technicians that were coming here every evening and working till midnight to build these things. And then after that, we built a whole bunch of other products down in the basement here, including the video modem. I built the first video modem. Was not live video. It was capable of taking one picture of a video input and then sending it through the cell system to the other end, and then it would print out on the screen or on a printer a picture that was scanned line by line. So it took about 20 seconds to send it and 20 seconds to print it out. But that was really a unique product also, and in fact that was used in the production of the movie Home Alone. The director of that movie was actually in Chicago or LA, and they were shooting it in the other place. So he would be able to take a look at the scene and the set and give okay or not remotely with that, even though it wasn't live video.
So talk a little bit about some of the other products that you've worked on.
Well, let's see. There's a whole bunch of different fields here. The pocket transistor radio, that was the first thing I built when I was 12, because I had this paper route, and it was huge. It was in Lancaster, and I took over another guy's paper route, and I ended up, first of all, trying it with my bicycle, but then I was able to buy a motor scooter, and I was out for a long time, and I wanted to have some music, so I built this first transistor pocket radio that was 8 years before Sony built a pocket transistor radio, which was kind of neat. And when they came out with theirs, it was 3 times as big. It really didn't fit in your pocket like mine did. In 1991, I got a contract from the Sahara Hotel Casino in Las Vegas to build the first replacement for the tape recorders, because every casino in the world were using tape recorders to record their cameras, and they had like 400 cameras in that hotel in the ceiling and a whole bunch more in the hallways and whatever, and they recorded them on tape recorders that every 8 hours somebody had to go push stop, rewind, stop, eject, take the tape, put a new tape in, push play, push record. And that was a full-time job for 3 people. I mean, it was amazing what amount of money they were spending. And it didn't give them random access. If they wanted to look up something that was taped, they had to go find the tape, cue it up. I designed a system that was all digital, used an MPEG-1 video recorder that was all online, that you could look at live, or you could look at 10 minutes ago or a week ago. And I had a really good contact there named Johnny Grimes, who had been in the security surveillance business in Las Vegas for 45 years, knew everybody in the Nevada Gaming Commission, and was able to convince them to let us do this big experiment of replacing all the tape recorders with my digital video recorders. And that was the start of something really big. And we had 5 or 6 casinos signed up to convert over. We were going to sell them thousands of tape recorders, video recorders. Then 9/11 happened. And all of a sudden, Las Vegas almost went out of business. Nobody was flying, nobody was going, nobody was gambling. The casinos were almost shutting down. So all the things were canceled, all my recording things were canceled. And then by the time the economy and Las Vegas started to recover, companies like Pelco and Honeywell discovered this new way of making a lot of money called digital video recorder. And they would go in and they would say, okay, we'll put digital video recorders in your facility and we won't charge you anything up front. I had to charge half the thing up front. They said, well, we won't charge anything up front. We'll do it, installation, and you can pay us when you get around to it with no interest.
Wow.
Well, that put me out of business because I couldn't do that. One little guy with this little company, I had to charge half up front and whatever. So that was the end of that. But right now, every casino in Las Vegas and the world is using digital video recorders that I built the first one of.
Wow.
So there's a picture of that recorder on the website that you can find.
Any particular technical challenges behind recording MPEG-1? What anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, the first video recorder that I built for the CIA used a ISA board that was expensive. It was like $2,000 for that board, and that was in '91 or '2. But by '97, the price of doing the MPEG-1 encoding had come down to $10 for a chip. So I was able to build these recorders that we were selling for $1,500 to the casinos for about, I built them for less than $100, plus a $100, $150 hard drive. And I just found a place in China that is selling a recorder that does exactly what mine did in 1999. Here, instead of price of $1,500, it's $43.
Wow.
So
how quickly things
I was
change.
making money there.
Yeah, no kidding. So talk to us a little bit about some of your other products.
Well, let's see. Did we go through the Macintosh portable? That was...
Well, we talked a little bit about it up there. Is there anything in particular you want to hit on it here?
4 or 5 different versions. There was the one that we built for the Army called the Tempest Mac. There was the first Mac laptop, which was the one called WalkMac, which we started selling in '87, and we sold for 5 years or 6 years, even though Apple had come out with their version of a portable, which was a big flop because it was so underpowered and the display was so terrible. Then they finally came out with one called PowerBook about '92 or '3, and that put mine out of business because that was smaller, lighter, more powerful. But I had a good run of things. I built 5 or 6 different versions. First portable Mac with a plasma screen that was battery powered, and I showed you a picture of that being used on an airplane going to Hawaii. I built the first Mac with a removable display that you could remove the backlight and put that display on an overhead projector and show the whole Mac screen on an overhead projector. And then I built the WalkMac, which we had to then change the name of because Sony didn't like us using WalkMac, too close to Walkman. So we ended up calling it Colby SE30. Let's see. This was a fun thing. This was the first cassette fast winder. And the reason for this was if you had a cassette and you wanted to go to the other end or go find something in the middle or whatever to push fast forward on the cassette recorder, it took forever to get there. Well, you just took the cassette and stuck it on the top of this, and this would wind it 10 times faster than that. And in fact, that product I put out, and I got a really good write-up in the Wall Street Journal, and we sold a whole bunch of those. And the first customer for that was a guy named Rudy Valley. Remember, he was in the 20s, was a really famous singer.
Sure.
And this was in the 70s. So he was old and had a whole bunch of cassettes that he wanted to be able to fast forward.
Wow.
But I remember shipping that first one, and he lived in Aruba, I think. So I was shipping it to somewhere I never even heard of.
So what was your first patent?
The first patent was a thing called Driver Awake, and that was a result of when I was in college, I ended up having to drive to LA a lot for different reasons. And I remember one time I was driving and I fell asleep and I woke up just as the car was about to go off a 200-foot cliff. And I said, well, I got to do something about this. So I built this thing, and what it is essentially a little computer that it has a sensor that monitors how many times you turn the steering wheel. And so when you're awake and starting to drive, you've got a lot more times you move the wheel than when you start getting sleepy. It starts to get slower and slower. And so you could set the level of where your slower part comes, and then it buzzes the buzzer and wakes you up. Well, this was in 71 or 70 or some. I mean, at that year, most cars didn't even have seat belts, much less have a safety device. So that never did sell, and the patent ran out 17 years later. And the day the patent ran out, Toyota announced they were offering that as an option in their cars. And today, 2013, there's a Cadillac and there's 2 or 3 high-end cars that offer the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think that was the impetus for it?
Well, this was the first one.
For it? Yeah.
It was the first one.
So how many patents do you have today?
Well, I have a patent that has to do with controlling robots that I sold to Sony. And that is the only patent that's still active. All the other patents have run out, and they're not active anymore. But that one is still used, and still, I think Sony uses that patent as part of their game controller system.
So how many do you think you've had over the years?
I didn't concentrate on getting patents because the problem with patents is, especially today, a patent today costs $16,000 to $20,000 to get and maintain, expensive every year. And in electronic stuff, patents these days run. I mean, the usefulness of them runs out in a few years. So I always decided that I think I'll just invent it, make the product and sell it, and then once competition comes along, I'll just move on to something else because I'm tired of this anyway. So
it seems to have worked pretty well.
I invented the first portable computer, the first portable Mac. I could have gotten patents on those, but they would have run out by now. But I mean, those would have been ones that I could have probably made a lot of money on. But as I say, the things are so expensive and so much of a hassle to do that I just decided that I don't really want to do any more patents. So I haven't gotten a patent since 1997, I think. So
unfortunately, we need to wrap this up. But is there anything in particular you'd like to mention in these last few minutes? Anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, somebody that's thinking about inventing things or building stuff, make sure that when you go to school, you not only get really good into computers, but also don't forget that the hands-on stuff. Now, take a course where you learn how to run a lathe, and you learn how to run a milling machine, and you learn how to run a 3D molding machine, and a lot of that stuff will help you to build something because you know exactly how the physical thing is made rather than just doing everything with theoretical stuff.
Mm-hmm. So you learn the hands-on skills,
That's
the
right.
fabrication
Yeah,
skills.
along with the computer stuff of CAD generation things too. But don't forget to put yourself in a situation where you are involved with hands-on things.
Okay. So you've mentioned that you have quite a bit of documentation. Do you have a feel for where those things are eventually going to live?
Well, I have 300 banker boxes, which are those boxes about this big under this house, and I have a 40-foot container up the hill here full of stuff. And a lot of that probably will be given to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California,
Mm-hmm.
because they have a few of my computers there. I was there last couple of weeks ago. The Macintosh group that invented the Macintosh had a reunion, and I was invited because I had built all these portable Macs, and so I met all the people that are involved at the computer museum, and I had the guy go and find out how many Colby computers were there, and he said he had, I think, 3 of them, but they don't have any of the later versions of the ofAmpex type or any of a lot of other ones. So I don't know if they would be interested though in a lot of this other stuff that's not really computer. So I need to figure out what I'm going to do with that. I think I'll donate that helicopter to the Hiller Museum in San Carlos. They like a lot of early anything having to do with airframe things, and
That's the aviation museum?
that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Sure.
So anything that has to do with aviation, they're interested in, and they've done a really good job. And I was lucky enough to meet Hiller before he died, before he built that actually, and he had this giant warehouse in San Carlos that we had lunch, and then he took me over there, and we spent all afternoon. He was going through explaining all this stuff to me personally, and then he built the Hiller Museum, and then he died 3 years later after that started, I think.
What a shame.
But I was amazed that he was still alive. I thought he had died a lot earlier, but he was still alive and kicking.
Cool. Well, thank you for sitting down with us. This was very informative and very enjoyable.
Oh, great.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Sure thing.